We will look after your money.
And today we're going to hear from the Deputy Leader of Reform, now heading up a big super economics and business department, BTE, business, trade and energy, because they can't work without each other. So ladies and gentlemen, to put some fresh ideas into this country, into investment, into a different approach from government, welcome to the stage, please, Richard Tyson.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. It's great to see you, and thank you, Nigel. And thank you to Glyn, Henry, and all of the team from USP Steel. It's amazing to be here in this factory, this incredibly successful, the largest independent processor of steel. And I feel very sort of passionate about steel. I just want you to picture the scene. A few years ago, I'm at a railway station in deepest rural India. And I look down at the railway tracks, and there are those immortal words, Sheffield Steel, 1895. And a sort of patriotic pride just went through my whole body, from my feet right up to the top of my head. It was extraordinary. I'm not sure we quite have the same patriotic pride now when people say, aren't we good as regulators? And didn't we do well with all our quangos and our compliance departments and our HR departments? I'm not sure that's what we call progress. And maybe that's part of the problem, ladies and gentlemen, because we're now becoming unproductive and our economy is flatlining. It's not growing at all per person. We're actually getting poorer. We're now in recession. And that's why we have to have a completely different approach. Because I think we all know that our economy is broken. 30, 40 years ago, we were growing at 2.5% to sometimes 4% every year. It's a good feeling. But there's no prospect of that if we carry on as we are. And that's why it's right to have a new super department covering business, trade, energy, including industry and housing, because we have to think about this in a joined-up, coordinated, strategic way. And it does make sense that actually you have successful business people who've been around the block a few times, who've succeeded, who've had some challenges, but who know what's required in order to drive growth, and profitability. And that's the key difference between Reform and all of the other parties. I've probably got more housing experience than the last 20 housing ministers put together. And I just want to touch on today 4 really important things. Firstly, regulations, trade, energy, and then finally, the opportunity for a huge new British sovereign wealth fund. Now, yes, regulations are not very glamorous. How often do you sit there filling out the forms online, offline, thinking, do I really need to do this? How many days and weeks have you wasted filling in all this stuff? And you think, is this really necessary? And that's the point. So much time is being wasted on unproductive nonsense. We all want smart regulations, of course, smart and safe. What we don't want is daft, dither and delay. And of course what that does is that adds to costs, and if that drives up prices from factories, then it's us, the consumer, that pays higher bills, and that increases the cost of living. Take housing, for example. Do you really need planning consent to update an existing mobile phone mast? Probably not. Do you really need planning consent to build a modest single-storey granny annex behind a large suburban house? Could we have trusted planning partners, whether they be big retailers or house builders, who operate within certain guardrails, but with significant sanctions if they overstep the mark? We've got to relook at all of this. We've got to drive down the costs of getting planning, drive down the costs of building, because guess what that'll do? It'll reduce the prices, that reduces the cost of living, that reduces the bills. That's what we're going to look at on regulations. On trade, we've got to be relentlessly pursuing the British national interest. What about actually being patriotic about not only promoting but buying British products. The public sector should have an absolute relentless focus on buying British. Of course, it just makes common sense. But it requires a certain courage that I fear does not exist amongst the current lot in this government. Look, we all want free and fair trade, of course. But when people break the rules, when they cheat, when they heavily subsidise product, in order to economically strangle you, that's when you've got to have the courage to say no. Enough's enough. That's not in the strategic national interest. And we have to focus on our strategic national interest. Those industries, whether it be steel, whether it be defence, whether it be energy, seismic interests, industries, like the automotive industry, of course, originated, centred around the West Midlands. Over 500,000 jobs still engaged in automotive. Are we really seriously willing to let that be decimated by the growth of Chinese electric vehicles coming in and taking our jobs? I would suggest absolutely not. I would suggest we need to be courageous and say we need to bring in tight quotas and significant tariffs, as we've seen other nations do. And what this does, it means that we have to have a great repeal act, and that's what a reform government will do. We will repeal things that are unnecessary or against the strategic national interest. Whether it's the lunacy of net stupid zero, whether it's the ZEV mandates that's driving up costs for our cars, or whether it's sometimes well-intentioned legislation that's having exactly the opposite effect. So, Labour's Employment Rights Bill, what's it doing? It's destroying jobs for young people. Youth unemployment now above the average across the EU. Shocking statistic. Likewise, the Property Renters Act, well-intentioned, but already reducing the supply of properties to rent and therefore increasing the prices. We have to change course on all of these things. And we have to change course on energy. And I just want you to, when you look at the madness that's going on, just look at the screen and a picture that will come up, hopefully now, which is, you may or may not be able to see it clearly, that's a picture of the North Sea with a line down the middle between, on the right, the Norwegian part of the North Sea, where you can see dots representing oil and gas production platforms, and on the left of the line is our side, the UK side of the line. Now, if I told you that all of those platforms, and indeed recent discoveries almost as we speak, so close to the line, but of course oil and gas fields, they don't respect the line at the top of the water, they go underneath both sides. So you now have the mad situations where our good friends the Norwegians, they're literally taking, borrowing, you could be a bit punchy and say stealing, our gas, and what are they then doing with it? They're selling it back to the United Kingdom. I'm sorry, folks, but that absolutely defies all common sense. And that is the madness of net zero. We all know that to be a rich nation, you have to have cheap, plentiful energy. It is as simple as that. We're not growing at all. America's growing at 4%, and their energy costs are, give or take, a quarter to a third of ours. And if we now maximise oil and gas production like we used to in the past, we use that energy treasure from under our feet, whether it be offshore or whether it be onshore. And what about being patriotic about it? What about saying Lincolnshire gas for Lincolnshire jobs for Lincolnshire growth, Yorkshire gas for Yorkshire jobs, Yorkshire growth? It's our patriotic duty to use our energy treasure. That's the difference. If we do that, then we can again reduce bills, reduce the cost of living, and therefore everybody has more money in their pocket at the end of the week. And the multiplier effect, if you keep your jobs and your money from using our own energy treasure, is enormous. We know that. You see the growth, for example, in Aberdeen, in Scotland, in years gone by, but now jobs being destroyed in front of our very eyes. And there's a simple common sense maxim here. The cost of renewable plus backup for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, which occasionally happens in the UK, surely the cost of that must be more than the cost of backup. Gas, nuclear, basic common sense. And, I know Ed Miliband, he loves his renewables, but I have to tell him a secret. I call them the renewable robbers. They're taking our jobs, they're taking our money, and they're sending it overseas. And that is against our strategic national interest. But I'll tell you what is in our interest, and that is to launch a huge new £500 billion British sovereign wealth fund, which would take it into the top 8 around the world. We all think, of course, of the success of the Norwegian fund, Singapore. We could do that. We could have that. A fund patriotically backing British companies, buying and promoting British products, and yes, being involved in building hundreds of thousands of affordable homes for British workers and for our veterans, run by a best-in-class investment team. We've got plenty of them in and around the city of London. And that would be investing primarily in listed, but some unlisted companies, and it would have a strategic UK growth mandate, backing Britain all the way. We can have that. Extraordinarily, actually, it's right there in plain sight, in front of our very eyes, the opportunity, whether you're investing in high-tech of AI, whether you're investing in step fusion, SMR nuclear reactors, critical tech, defence, energy, SME growth capital. These are the opportunities for this British Sovereign Wealth Fund that other countries do, and we need to be humble enough to learn from others. It's there in front of us, but no one's had the vision before to say this is the right thing to do. I've been looking closely at the local government pension scheme that has assets of about £500 billion, covering 98 funds across councils across the whole of the UK. And it's got some 7.75 million members. Well-intentioned, but being woefully managed in a completely disparate, uncoordinated way, with no vision, no purpose of backing Britain whatsoever. And it's being massively overcharged, overinflated fees to the tune of 4 or 5 times, whilst it's underperforming hugely, never meeting the benchmarks. If I told you that it was being overcharged by £2 billion a year, that it was underperforming by £8 to £10 billion a year, this is not good enough. We can change this. Just in the world of property, it's got over £30 billion of property. Makes it, by a factor of 2, the largest property company in the country, potentially, and yet no collective thinking, no coordination. And when I was in the property world, we used to love selling to county council pension schemes. They were known as the sucker of last resort. No surprise they're not meeting the benchmark. We can change all of that because we can be poacher turned gamekeeper, acting on behalf of the British taxpayer. And one of the reasons, of course, they're underperforming is because they're investing in a whole load of woke nonsense. And when I look today, one of these funds, investing in a sustainable equity fund, missing its benchmark, not by 0.5% or 1%, by 5% in 1 year. This is insanity. Instead, we can transform this into a British sovereign wealth fund, proudly paying all of the members and pensioners, of course, whilst patriotically backing Britain all of the way. And of course, the rights, the benefits and the entitlements of all of the existing members, absolutely rock solid, identical. In fact, they're even more protected under this proposal. But there's already a huge surplus in these funds. The liabilities are under £300 billion. And what we should do is we should, of course, look after the existing members, but say to new employees of councils, you'll join a new defined contribution scheme akin to the best of the FTSE 100 pension schemes. That, of course, makes sense. So by closing these schemes to new joiners, the liabilities over a few decades reduce, and that is the right thing to do. What it also does, that allows one to cut the existing employer contributions on the existing council funds to around 10%, saving councils millions and millions and millions of pounds every single year. And as head of Doge, that's what, of course, we're very focused on. Our good friends, the press, rarely want to point that out, but these are the sort of savings that we can do because we are best in class. This sovereign wealth fund will have the best in class professionals running it. And it might be invested, rather like the Norwegian fund, in 75% equities, mainly listed, some unlisted. About a third of that could be in the UK. That would be an increase of over £100 billion of investments into the UK stock market, which would mean more confidence, higher valuations, more new listings. That keeps businesses growing here. You know, the growth capital, absolutely vital. 10% could be invested in UK bonds, and then 15% could be invested in local infrastructure and hundreds of thousands of affordable homes across our towns, our villages, our local areas, and our regions. For each of these funds, that could be, on average, up to £1 billion of extra renewal and regeneration investment in just a matter of a few years. That's the opportunity, as well as, coming back to steel, the opportunity to invest in some critical strategic national assets like the importance of primary steel, British Steel. And that's why this fund could actually own British Steel. It could renew, reline, refurbish those 2 blast furnaces ready for the next 60 years. That's how we can ensure that great businesses like this one are buying British steel and not steel from overseas. That surely is the right thing to do. This sovereign wealth fund, it could generate an annual surplus of between 20 and 30 billion pounds a year for more investment into growth companies, for more investment into renewal and regeneration across our regions. This is such a huge opportunity. It's an absolute game changer. This could be one of our greatest legacies that reform essentially brings to the United Kingdom. It'll drive prosperity. It'll drive growth. But I guess we won't satisfy everybody. I guess there'll be a few people who may not like this idea. I just ask you to think about what's their interest? What are their vested interests? Are they making money by actually ripping off the British taxpayer? Well, we're looking after the British taxpayer, as Robert said last week. We will look after your money. And this is one of the right ways to do it. So in summary, ladies and gentlemen, the opportunity for a huge new economics and business department covering business, trade and energy. The opportunity to re-industrialise Britain with bold British companies. The opportunity to re-motivate Britain with incredible, the brightest British entrepreneurs. To re-energise Britain with beautiful British oil and gas. Marvellous. And to rebuild and renew Britain with this British sovereign wealth fund. This is the way forward. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the best vision with the best people. It's the best plan. If we do this, we can make our families more prosperous, we can make our communities more prosperous, and our country more prosperous. Family, community, country. The core values of reform. Because we all know this is the only way to fix our broken economy. And only reform can fix broken Britain. Thank you very much.